All right, so hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Elise Rosemarin. I'm a Senior Vice President here at AKAM. Tonight we're going to be discussing garage and structural inspections, upcoming laws, guidelines, and recommendations. Joining with me, I have esteemed colleagues, Jean Ferrara and Nick Ferrara from JMA Consultants, and our very own Andy Leight, who is also a Senior Vice President here at AKAM. Just to give you a little bit of a background of who is going to be joining us as our panelists. Jean and Nick are with JMA Consultants, as I mentioned before. JMA has been in business for 41 years and is a 3-generation family business. Amazing. I don't know if I could do that with my family members, guys. They're lovely. They're lovely. Their services include FISP inspections, facade, roof and exterior restorations and inspections, and apartment renovation reviews. Nick is a licensed professional engineer, and Jean has been involved with many DOB committees, including Local Law 11. So we have you to thank for that, huh, Jean? I'm sure.
No, not all of it, but a good chunk of things that made it a little more palatable for the owners. We'll talk about it a little bit.
I was going to say, I don't know if you're so welcome anymore. No, I'm kidding. That's great.
I hear your point.
It's important. It's very important. All right. And Andy Leight is a Senior Vice President here at AKAM. He has over 2 decades of experience in all areas of residential, commercial, and industrial property management. He is an expert in the daily operation of client properties, including but not limited to the design and implementation of maintenance and preventative maintenance programs and local, state, and federal law, regulation, and co-compliance. Welcome all. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you all for joining us tonight as well. So we're going to start off with a brief overview, and then I'll kick it off to Jean and Nick, who will discuss our evening's topics. All right, so tonight the overview will be a proposed garage inspection law from the DOB, which is going to be something important that we should all discuss, especially if you have garages, recommendations on garage inspections, structural inspections, and then we'll do a Q&A at the end. And we, of course, invite you to ask us any questions. If you're not, unfortunately, if you're watching this as a recording and you have questions as you think of them, please, of course, all of our information will be at the end, and you can email us and we'll get right back to you. All right, so I believe Jean and Nick, you guys are up. So let's discuss garage inspections from the Department of Buildings and what's supposed to be going on the next few months.
Okay, so as you all know, the New York State started this. There were some incidents and accidents in garages up in upstate New York, and they passed a law that required that everybody do inspections of their garages. The way it works in New York State is New York State is New York State, and New York City is New York City. So New York City has their own codes and regulations and so forth. They are not mandating the inspections, but every building has the responsibility to make sure their building is in good repair and is safe. That is an actual code excerpt from the New York City Building Department. That is the #1 violation that the New York City building inspectors give out to building owners when they come out and they find something that's not safe. So with that being said, even though there's no formal law or set of rules out from the building department at this time, we know they are forthcoming based on conversations with DOB. Now, a couple things are interesting here. #1, we expect a new code to be issued by the New York City Building Department in the next 5 to 7 months. Now, the problem with that is, although I used to sit on many committees with the building department, they're a little differently structured nowadays. And with the new, I shouldn't say the new administration, but the administration after Bloomberg, things have changed, okay, as far as the input from the professional community on the outside. And sometimes we don't find out about things until you find out about them. And when we know something is forthcoming, we try to warn our clients so that they could be proactive in trying to be up to date. And Andy and AKAM have always been part of that process. We've done seminars with them on all different subject matters because try to keep them at least 5 to 6 months ahead of the curve, because these things aren't cheap to deal with. And there is not a sufficient qualified experts to deal with these problems based on the laws that they're presenting as they keep increasing them. And that you all know as board members and building owners, these things are becoming very expensive as they relate to elevators, energy codes, and listeria inspection. I mean, you can just keep going on, okay, about every code that just keeps getting passed I know Andy's a big fan of that, right? But the reality here is that we expect to see a code that's going to come out in the next 5 to 7 months, and it's going to have a section in it that is going to be for garages. Now, those garage inspections are probably going to follow the way that the FISP inspections are done. So the qualified PEs and RAs who have experience in garage and building restoration will be allowed to do the inspections. We're hearing that you'll have 5 years from the date of the time the law is passed, and then potentially after the first set of inspections are done, they don't have to be redone for another 10 years. Again, that's just hearsay at the present time. It's nothing that you can have as set in stone. So what is it that you have to do now? So because you're all coming up with refinancing loans for all the other laws out there that you have to follow, such as your elevator upgrades and FISP inspections and all this other stuff, you may want to know if you got something downstairs that's a problem. So let's talk about garages just in general. Garages are part of many buildings, but not all buildings. So you say, what is a garage? A garage is a space in which, people can go into with a car, and there is storage for not only exterior public to put their car, but also the people in the building. It can come in many forms. It could be multi-level. It could be just one level, which is people come in, they go down a ramp, or they go on the one level and they sit on grade with nothing below them. Those are good garages in our opinion, because there's no chance of that slab on where the cars are running, even if it does deteriorate, causing much of a problem. The garages that are a problem are those that either have landscaping above them, or the garages that have multi-layers, that have where the cars come in with all the salts, they sit, and then they rot the reinforced concrete. And concrete comes in many different fashions. Buildings built prior to 1955, 1960, they may have a different reinforcing than those built after those periods. And then some of the ones that got in trouble up in upstate New York, unfortunately, were post-tension slabs, which they actually had rods in them that were like piano wires holding everything together. And when they rotted, they blew out the sides, and then the whole garage fell. So that's really how some of these laws get into this mix. What I would say is that the simplest thing, which is just walking your garage every once in a while and looking in it and seeing if there's things that don't make sense, like exposed rebars or reinforcing steel that's popping, or something reporting of falling, or this heavy water penetration. What I would recommend before this law gets enacted, it doesn't cost much money. Go to your building consultant, the gentleman who you feel comfortable with. And if you don't feel comfortable with somebody, then you go out and you hire another firm. Your management team can give you some recommendations. And that specialize in garage installation, repairs, and surveys and so forth. Now, that engineer shouldn't be a massive inspection to begin with. It should not be, a $40,000 survey. That's not what you're looking for. What you're looking for is a couple hours of that gentleman's time or lady's time to come in, walk in your garage and say, we got a problem, or we don't have a problem. And then they can give you an opinion as to what they recommend is the next step, which would either be a full forensic study inside the garage to determine what the degree of deterioration. There's things that can happen in a garage, such as carbonation, chloride infiltration into the slab, so the reinforcement starts to rot. You can have other chemicals that can cause problems, and you can have just simple concrete patching that needs to be repaired. Now, who's responsible for the garage? And that's something you have to speak to your management team. Number one, my suggestion is to figure out who is responsible. Is it part of the lease for the leasee to do the repairs, or is it the leaseor to do the repairs? And you say, well, if the leasee's got to do the repairs, oh, great, that's fine. Remember, the leasee's there for a short period of time, or may not renew the lease. Things in garages, with COVID, a lot of the garages renegotiated leases and so forth. But if the leasee is responsible, make sure that you watch what he's doing, or you review, or have your consultant review what they're proposing to do. Because it's like a cancer. Inside the garages, if you have a lot of cancer to the reinforcement, or you have just a substrate that's not able to be patched to because it has so many salts in it or chlorides and it's broken down, you doing repairs to it are not going to hold. And that's the key. You want to do a repair that's going to hold. And sometimes in garages, you can't repair them. You actually have to replace the slabs. So I'll give you a short experience we had in the building years ago. We get called in, a management company takes over the building, and we're asked to take a look at some of the garage work that's ongoing. We go there. It's a pretty big garage. There are no slabs left in the garage. All the columns are freestanding, and there's no slab in between the columns. There's no permits. The contractor was an interior restoration company, for the best I can determine, and three stories of the garage were fully exposed. Now, that's like, you have a skeleton and there's no cartilage holding anything together, and there's nothing bracing the bones apart, and there could be a collapse. So that's how crazy sometimes people are in their restoration. And the responsibility for the repair was the garage operator. And he was thinking he was doing himself a favor, and he got this great price to rip out all the slabs. That's where you really need a structural engineer involved in that situation. Most of the garage restorations we come across are relatively minor. There's some concrete patching involved, maybe a couple of through slab repairs. And then the most important part of any garage restoration is the corrosion inhibitor application and the coating of the slabs themselves. See, because if you're not gonna, when you have original virgin concrete, is the best time to put a coating on. But if you waited 20, 30 years down the road and you did repairs, that concrete's going to accelerate in its deterioration, not like it was brand new. So what you really want to focus in on all of this is to protect the repairs and make sure that what you're doing is something that has a 10-year, 20-year lifespan, because it's a big investment. Now, we think that when this law comes out, people will want to jump all over it. But what's going on? We're going to be in the middle of the fifth inspection cycle. We'll be in the B cycle. We'll have layover from the A work, and we'll have we'll have the C cycle also starting and also being looked at. All the engineering companies are pretty well loaded up. They're loaded up now because the next subject we're going to talk about, which is foundation and column inspections and the rest of the building. But you have to think about really managing your problem. So if you go walk in your garage and you see the garage is perfectly fine, there's absolutely nothing to do, that's one thing. But if you start to see the spalling of the concrete, the cracking of the concrete, stalactites dripping of the lime and cement coming from floor to floor, that's a telltale sign you got a problem. The next telltale sign is if the lighting fixtures are no longer working in the garage. And you say, why don't they work anymore? Well, the conduits are all corroded, and we abandon the lighting, and we just get by what we get by with. That's telling you something, because the conduits run in the same slab that the reinforcing runs in, and that can mean that you're having larger problems. And it's not just the lighting that's the problem. So first, do an inspection. That's very simple. Every engineering firm should have enough time to send one of their qualified people out to go take a look around, see if there's anything crazy. If you do have something crazy, let them come up with a scope for a survey and a projected cost for the restoration, so that you can start budgeting these prices in. You may have an area that, you can't park a car underneath and you need to shore. That's okay. Okay, you may take one spot out, and then you can prolong the life of the repair in that area, and that may be something that you need to do. The next thing you need to do is to understand that you may want to enter into a garage restoration project if you have nothing else going on at this time, because maybe now that law is not in full effect, you're doing a restoration on your garage, and now would be the time to do that restoration. I have many buildings that we manage. I mean, we're over 400 buildings now, and I've had them for 20, 30, 40 years. They don't have major projects anymore. They basically do relatively small projects every 10 years, maybe a real major one 20 to 30 years out. And the garage may be an interim project that they get into, but they know about what they have to do 5 to 10 years in advance. So that's important. I would say, though, that in garage restoration work, there's not as many garage restoration contractors as there are facade contractors. And every facade contractor says, yeah, I do garages. Well, when you do a garage, what's the number one thing everybody wants to know? How quick will you be out? Okay. And can we keep the garage open? Only guys that are experienced in that can even operate in that realm. And the second thing is, maybe the answer is no. Maybe the answer is to shut the garage down for a month or two, get it done, and be done. That's sometimes a better way. And there's different products out there in the market. You have slow curing products and you have fast curing products. There's no downfall to either one of them, but you got to know which product works in the right situation. Finally, it's not only when you do the restoration, you would hire a firm like us, you'd also have to hire a special inspection company that is certified by the building department to actually take samples and observe the structural stability and so forth and so on. So the projects have become much more complicated. Same thing with the facade project. All right. Now, the next subject, I think, is more of what some of the board members are concerned about nowadays because of Florida. So we've come to a point in which, right after the collapse in Florida, we get about 100 phone calls. And you know what? I understand it. I used to be a board member in the complex that I live in as well. And what ends up happening is the liability of the board member should be something you should be concerned with. And I get it. But I think Florida was a unique situation where you had items that were observed and they were planned for. And this is just going off of news, that you hear. And they were about to start a job and then something happened. It's simple, but maybe not so simple as that. There probably were things that could have been done, and we're all going to find out about all that. But do you have a pool above your garage? Do you have a planted area or another area? And have you had significant deterioration within your garage that you know about, and your pool can't hold water? If those questions are all with a yes check, get nervous, get doing something and get going as quickly as you can. That's not a very common thing here in New York City. In Queens and Brooklyn and some of the outer boroughs, there are a lot of indoor parking garages with planted areas on top. There have been a lot of accidents over the years during restoration projects. Either a contractor overloaded it, or during the process, the garage let loose and they had some issues. I think Park City Estates had one years and years ago. What I would say though is, in general, what we find is that every building we're going to, for the most part right now, and some we've done recently for Andy and AKAM, not really finding really bad stuff. Everything is relatively minor, nothing that would be a big concern. But I'm going to tell you about a building we came across a number of years ago. It was located on the Upper West Side, and there were reports in the laundry room that the wall boards and the tiles were popping off the column enclosures, the surfacing that goes around the columns. And they also had water along the floor line. So we went in and we picked a couple of the tiles off, and when we looked behind, we saw some rusting and scaling of the structural column. We tried to trace that back, and we couldn't trace it back until we had good meat. And that turned into a major structural repair job while the building was occupied, put in shoring, did all the repairs and so forth, and eliminated the water entry. So here's the key points. If you have water entry in your basement and you have issues around structural elements like foundation walls, columns, or things like that, or you see significant cracking and moving downstairs, that's when you really need to get concerned. So for a few hours worth of time, again, you hire a professional to come in, walk around, get as much exposure as you can in the areas as possible. And a lot of basements nowadays, they're all finished. I was in one this morning. There was probably 10% of the whole surface area that I could actually see. But there were some access doors. There was history I got from the super. The only time they ever had water in the basement was during a water main break years and years ago. And there was nothing to give you a red flag to say you had to go to the next level. But if you do, that's how that process starts. Right now, we have no guidance from New York City Building Department that this is something that's a mandated inspection. Why? Let's talk about Florida. Florida, the buildings sit on sand. Okay, they don't have bedrock. Here in New York City, we do have bedrock. And the columns and the foundations, the footings, the piles all go to bedrock for the most part. There's some out of borough areas that may not have that, or they may have floating foundations. These are all things that are possible, but for the most part, the high rises in New York City hit bedrock. That's a totally different scenario. And as we know in Florida, we don't know yet whether it was the foundation of the loose. We don't know yet whether it was parts of the building took out the columns on the way down. That's probably more likely a scenario, but the reality here is you need to make sure your foundation is strong, and to do those types of inspections doesn't cost a lot of money. Most, if not all, of your exterior restoration engineering firms could come in and at least look at it. It may be beyond them to do some of the structural repairs. It's possible. So if you are going to enter into those type of repairs, once a problem is found, you should make sure that person has experience in that field. And we have experience in most types of construction, but sometimes we come across things that we're not used to. The hybrid construction made by the new generation developer is sometimes difficult to work around. And again, then you need to find somebody who has some experience in those types of restorations. And we would recommend, or your management could recommend.
Sorry to interrupt really quick. What do you mean by the hybrid?
Well, there's steel studs now that are being used as structural elements in the building. You have
Old buildings built on top of
old buildings built on top of new buildings, where you have the bottom is made out of concrete, the top is made out of steel, or you have certain walls that are old and other walls that are new. And the calculation of how that all works together, that matrix, is done by engineering firms that have computer banks and access to certain design elements that we can't afford just as a regular engineering firm to go across. So you would go to the original designer if they're around, ask for different drawings and so forth. So that's what we're talking about, hybrids. When you're looking at buildings, and we look at buildings, we like the old brick buildings, the old steel structures, reinforced concrete, just like drive it. People have drive it, or they have that ephes, okay, that on the sidewalls. Seemed like nice at the time, but as people have experienced, it's been a real disaster with mold and water entry. So some of those hybrid designs, that's when you come into a little bit of a problem, because their calculation for safety factors may be way different than the original guys that didn't know what they were doing, so they overbuilt. So look at the Brooklyn Bridge. Look how long that stood. Look how long the Tappan Zee Bridge stood. Okay, so you see how that works? Some of the older construction actually holds up much better than the newer construction because of those safety factors.
So if you see cracks in the foundation of a garage that was newly built, just saying, oh, but it's new construction, where it's not a cause for concern, you're saying actually that's not true.
Right. So we went into a building. We went into a building the other day, and it was a newer building. The columns were strong and sound, but the cinder block walls that they did to go between those areas, they had cracks in them. Why? They didn't leave room for expansion and contraction in the top and the bottom. Was it a structural problem? No. But if you start seeing cracks in the columns, and you start seeing cracks on the outside, like when we're doing FISP inspections and we see all these cracks running up the sides of the building, that's a telltale sign. Hey, you better go downstairs and find out why all this is cracking. Is it only because of water entry up above, or is there other problems in the building? So it's how to know what you see and then know what the next step is. And that's really where it comes into play, with different firms and different experiences. And if you have a very hard type of construction, I'll give you an example. Nick and I have been doing surveys together for over 10 years, but my father, when he's since passed, but you really learn in the field. And a lot of the new generation engineering companies were having a hard time finding good staff. And the key is to really start from the full training in-house. And so they get the full experiences of it. And it's surprising, but it's hard work. And we used to get a lot of guys out of the military years ago, especially in mechanical fields. But now if you don't need a nuclear engineer or a high-end electrical engineer with radar, the military really isn't helping us much in our fields. Okay. All right. I think we covered a lot of subject matter. I know you probably have a bunch of questions. You want to try to filter some of those questions?
And I'm sure Andy can also give an idea how AKAM handles, from our end, these types of inspections and what our recommendations are to buildings. But can you go back a little bit and just, I don't know if you even know the answer to this, but what is the impact of a bad garage on the overall building? Does it just impact the garage, or does it impact the actual structure of the overall building? It's not to go back to Surfside, but as an example where it did impact the overall building potentially, if that is a cause.
Normally, the garages don't cause impact to the overall structural stability of the building, normally. Mm-hmm. But as I said before, if you start to deteriorate many slabs in the garage and the bracing between the columns is no longer there or intact, it can cause a problem. Where I am more concerned is corner columns, okay, on the edges or the corners of the building, because as you know, wind loads and flexing and movement at the corners is very severe. So if you start to see a significant deterioration in one of those columns, it's more troubling. I have not seen any garage that we've been involved with in the last 40 years cause us to say an evacuation of the building. Have they caused us to say evacuation of the garage? Yes, where we did not believe that parking cars in that garage or on any level made any sense until the repairs were made. Yes, we have come across that.
And do you know why, all of a sudden now the DOB is mandating this law for garages? What was the impetus for it, or?
Yeah, as I said, this started from the state. Okay, there was garages that failed in many. When you go upstate, when you go out of New York City, I'll give you an example. Just go from New York to New Jersey. I live on the Jersey side. Andy, I believe you live in the same thing, right along the Hudson Palisades, right?
Yes.
And when you look at the slabs on most of the buildings in New Jersey, they're anywhere from 4 to 6 inches. Okay, the structural slabs. When you look at the slabs in New York City, many of them were built from 6 to 8 inches thick, like on newer construction buildings. It's just the construction's heavier. The codes are more stringent. The load capacities that they're trying to reach are, and the heights that they are going require the heavy build. In New Jersey, we've seen a lot of garage collapses, especially in Hackensack and other places like that, because they didn't build the garages, or they're freestanding, like part of a hospital or part of a shopping center. They're freestanding garages, and they were built to go up fast, go up quick, and no maintenance. Well, no, nothing is no maintenance. If they would have put coatings on those slabs and kept the salts out of them, it would have lasted a lot longer.
I think there was one in Atlantic City a couple of years ago as well.
Right.
It's interesting, yeah, because it seems, it makes sense, and I've even on my own walkthroughs, I've seen some, garages that even from my eyes don't look like they're in great condition, and then you wonder what the impact is, So I think this is good advice as far as just being mindful of the impact, especially if these laws come to pass, as you're saying, and now you're going to get penalized for not keeping up with them.
One of the other things. Go ahead,
Andy. I want to discuss real briefly what you just mentioned, maybe touch on it a little further, where certainly the importance of the inspections, but just seeing cracks dependent upon location and the like isn't necessarily indicative of a greater structural problem. There might be something that needs to be addressed, but I just would have a concern that, a client walks into a garage, sees a crack, automatically assumes the worst. And while we should definitely pay it mind, it doesn't necessarily mean the worst is taking place.
So prior to 1960s, late 60s, early 70s, expansion and contraction joints were not really part of much construction. It was not understood. So you have something called concrete creep, you have thermal expansion, you have loading capacity issues. So there's no design in there to allow the slabs to move in any one location. So a lot of people did repairs at one location, let's say the top of the ramp, or as you get onto the ramp to go to another level, and that crack would always come back. No matter what material you used, it would always come back, because that's where the garage wants to move. So I say, if it's not a structural issue at that point in time, allow that area to move. So when you're walking around, you may see some cracks that are really just part of movement that is natural in that structure. Now, here's the problem. You leave that crack open, you allow the cars to come in, the salt and the chloride goes into the crack, gets to the reinforcing rods, and then no good. Then you have that cancer that starts. So when you go into these older garages and you start to see these cracking and spalling, and then right underneath the pavement, the pops, you see these lines, approximately a 6-inch grid. So squares that go in 6-inch direction on both sides, or 8-inch direction, depending on how it's designed, that's the reinforcing. And what ends up happening is you find that that's the start, or actually that's at the point when a more significant restoration is required. And you may only get that in one spot. I'll give you an example. Went into a garage and she was mint, perfectly mint. There was nothing wrong. The building was over 60, 70 years old, except in this one location. And I couldn't immediately figure out why that was the problem. And I asked, why is it that this area, is there anything that, oh yeah, they used to wash the cars here, and then we stopped them because they would, they would wash all the salts off, and there was no drain in that area, and the water would sit. And that area got 90 times or 100 times the amount of, deterioration salts that would go into that area.
Hmm.
And another building, we had a situation where a car caught on fire, years and years ago. And the soot was removed, they painted and everything, but the ceiling started falling, and so did the floor slab. What happens in a car fire, the heat gets so hot that the concrete actually gets messed up. It gets to a point in where the matrix of the lime and the cement and everything, all the aggregates that bind in there, even some of the sand actually turns to a glass, and the way that they bind together causes that concrete to deteriorate. You see that sometimes on sidewalks and other things. So you're right, Andy. It takes a trained eye, but if you see cracks and you say to yourself, okay, if you see nothing and everything looks brand new and mint, no problem, okay, to some extent. But you're going to need to do an inspection according to the building department in a relatively short period of time. But if you see a lot of things and you see those cracks, just call in your consultant. It's a couple of hours worth of time to say, hey, you got something big or you got nothing.
And that's really what we're doing for a lot of our buildings now. I mean, I know you mentioned that you've done some work for me recently, which you have. I mean, we have a general services agreement on our local law work, so we just added a couple of hours to that. And that really is just, a peace of mind that I think most buildings should be considering. It's not a huge expense. If there's something that's out there, it's better to, nip it in the bud now, basically, address it, pay it mind, and give yourself peace of mind that there is an issue or there is not an issue.
Right. But one thing you should all remember that, that consultant coming in for a couple of hours and it's not an MRI of your building. It's not
an invasive,
right.
Probing look at the structure. It's just a visual inspection that's going to give you some thoughts as to maybe we need to explore this.
So you need to go to the next step, right?
Or we're more comfortable with what we're seeing.
Mhm.
Right. Exactly.
Knowing that, say a building is thinking about, adding on a garden or what have you to their garage, knowing what you know now and knowing that we're going to start to see fines associated with, potentially that type of build, would you recommend abstaining from adding on anything to the roof, or is there?
Okay. So a lot of people are bringing pressure to go green or, to get green credits, the carbon credits.
Mhm.
And this is not a political issue for me. It's more of a engineering. So a lot of people say the engineers, they're a little bit more methodical. They make more sense. The architects, they like everything to look beautiful. Look, I like both, but I'm going to be a realist. If that garage is nothing more than an exposed area with a roof on top and pavement, that's great. That's the better way to go as far as engineering is. But if you need to reclaim some credits to put a green roof there or a garden and everything, don't be so enticed by the few dollars that you may be saving, saying, well, this is going to pay for itself.
Mhm.
Andy's old enough, and I'm old enough now to realize the first generation of solar energy.
Mhm.
And we see those scars on buildings, the old solar panels that never made it, okay? Today's generation of solar panels, I think, is different, okay? I think it's moved a little bit. It's something you could look into, but when you have to go re-rig that building, when you have to go do that facade inspection, when you have to go do to fix a leak and to do all those things, and you have to re-roof at some point in time, nobody's going to give you money to take that off and put that back. They're giving you money now to do something. It's not going to cover the whole cost. And you have to think about what is the ongoing maintenance. Now, I'll give you this. You all drive around Manhattan and you see these beautiful piers. I'm a boater and I drive up and down the Hudson and I see these beautiful piers and parks they put in. They're gorgeous. What I want to know is, did somebody budget money to restore and repair those piers as life goes on? Because you also drive around, you see these little pieces of wood sticking up all over the place, and those are the piers that didn't make it, okay? And I'm just saying that whatever you do, it's not done. It has to be replaced at some time, and think about those costs that are involved. And you know what? Sometimes it's worth it. Sometimes it's not.
Mhm.
I don't like green roofs up on buildings all the way up top, because especially when I have rigging issues or I have expensive penthouses, and a regular roof lasts just fine. But if you a lot of these roofs get real small at the top, but adding that element of a planted area or a plaza deck, some buildings can't do it. The code just doesn't allow it. So the
But it
same
isn't
thing is
just
true
that,
with
it isn't just that, Gene. And by the way, thank you for aging me. I appreciate it.
yeah.
At least you
Um,
didn't age me. Thank you, Jane. Appreciate that.
But I mean, the key component you have to do straight off the bat is a weight load analysis, because while you think that putting some planters and some soil and the like, all that soil wet. I mean, you have to know that the structure can support the weight you're planning to put up on that deck, and
Right.
in some cases it may not.
Right. And then you have to figure in snow load. You have to figure in this, how much is the soil when it's dry? How much is it when the soil is wet? No, our soil is going to filter the water. It's going to go straight down to the roof and right to the drain. Well, over time, that doesn't happen. Okay. And that all that filtration that everybody thinks that's around, sometimes it doesn't work that way. Okay. And you're right. I just say, keep it simple, stupid. And it works. But if you want to go the other way, it's not that you can't. It's just that please think in the future. You want to have a party, open up the roof plaza. I have a lot of clients that have these roof terraces up top. And I tell them the bad news. I said, listen, one day somebody's going to come and inspect this place, and you may not be the code. You don't have a C of O for the usage up there. And they keep adding plants. They keep doing things. And I go like this. I said, but someday you're going to get a violation. And every once in a while that someday comes and they go, Gene, how are we going to fix this? I said, you can't. You don't have ADA compliance. You don't have the structural load capacity. I mean, it's standing. It's not causing a problem. But I can't prove capacity. I can't, certify that. And then you have other issues where, you have parapet heights that are now less than they should be. There's a lot of issues with that. So I see these articles in a lot, New York Times. I see the Habitat. I love the Habitat. I write articles for them, but you got to really be careful with these amenities that you're creating. Bicycle rooms, laundries, storage rooms in the basement. If the C of O doesn't say that that's what's got to go there, Andy, as well as I do.
Exactly right.
Yeah, it just takes an inspector to come around, and that's the problem. And that's what they're there for, because we've seen so many laundry rooms without sprinklers, gas dryers without the proper venting, and so forth. It seems nice, but it's not legal. And then you have insurance issues as well. One of the good things is that what you're going to find, I think, that the insurance, you've all must be seeing insurance increases in your premiums for your buildings. I see it around, and I'm in touch with a lot of the consultants. Some of these inspections, when you pass, such as this inspection with a safe filing, maybe this garage inspection with a safe filing, your elevators with a safe filing, that should help your premium. Will it help your premium to offset what they're raising you to the extent that it eliminated? I don't know. I've seen some real significant increases in insurance this year across the board. So that is another thing that's a factor. And that's New York. I always say, watch who you vote for and ask them the question before you vote for them. We need to get rid of the labor law, 240 and 241. That's what's killing the insurance for you and costing insurance for me and the contractors, and you just pass it on. It has to do with workman's comp claims and passing third parties and so forth. So the final thing I want to say on a couple of things that we mentioned tonight, nothing's set in stone. You do have a mayoral election coming up. I don't know what the next mayor is going to be doing. Mm-hmm. The problem is the city council passes a law. So sometimes it's out of the mayor's hand. The city council passes a law to do this, right? And then the building department comes up with rules and codes to give the city council the direction or give them the appeasement of the code that they're looking for. I always say, people judge political people by what the laws that they passed. All I'm saying is that maybe it's time to judge the political people by the laws they don't pass for a little while, just a little while. Let's get over COVID. Let's get over the financial issues. Let's get over everything else, because, and Andy will tell you, I've talked them off the ledge a couple of times, right, Andy? It's just, we need a little slowdown on the regulations. I'm not saying there isn't a need for them. I'm just saying you need a little slowdown because a lot of the boards are having a problem financially trying to make this and the managing agents. The life in the day of a managing agent is much different, and the life in the day of my staff is much different than it was 5, 10 years ago, just by dealing with all this. Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, so we do have some questions, and so we'll just start, and everyone feel free to just put your questions in the Q&A box, and we of course will get back to you hopefully right now, and if not, if you think of something later, please let us know. So someone wants to know, do their cars have to be, well, for the garage, do cars have to be removed during the inspection?
No, and they could be jockeyed around. What we normally do is we ask the garage operator to jockey the cars around so we can do our inspection. So there's 2 ways to do these. Number one, you take some probes, you take some cylinders, and you send the concrete out for testing. Another way is we call a chain drag. You actually take a chain and drag it across the surface. You'll hear bop, 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 that hollow sound. That hollow sound, that concrete could look perfectly fine. But when you hear that hollow sound, that's telling you that the cement is delaminated from the reinforcing underneath, and it's about to have a problem. So when we go into a restoration, we would circle those areas, and then when we start removing them, we actually then go around with hammers until you hear solid concrete. And that's how we make sure we get to the edges of the cancer.
And you have like sounding tools, Gene, like the rollers, basically, that'll give you that similar kind of hollow sound.
It all depends on how big the garage is and what technique you want to use. I had a guy says, well, I want to use this. I said, your garage is 50 feet by 60 feet. I can't even get that equipment in to get started. The best thing for me is just to go around on a skateboard or a dolly with a bucket and just sound it with my hand. That's really all you needed to do in that situation. But in other situations, you want to use a chain drag. It really helps you. But a lot of contractors, there's all different ways to do it. The question is how big a surface area you have, how much you want to spend in doing those surveys, and how much do you really want to do during the actual work? Because you have a unit price and you have an estimate of what you think is going to be wrong, and you get into it and you go. We're normally 5 to 10% plus or minus on our quantities when we go into garage projects.
All right, good to know. Is there a way to identify the cause of a deterioration for lots of concrete falling down? For example, can you tell if the damage was from salt water dripping from cars versus a terrace above the garage that may have water leaks going into the garage?
Well, it all depends on the location. And when you look at the steel and you look at the deterioration, if you see stalactites or what they call calcification coming from the leaking area, that's normally salt is the issue. What does it matter? That's the way I look at it. I mean, if there's damage, I have to look at what's causing it. If it is from salts, I'm going to determine that through a process called chloride test. We have a manufacturers. One of the best manufacturers. You got Sika, you got BSAF, MBS. There's all different manufacturers. IPA. Their technical reps come out with you, and we actually do testing, and then we determine what the best product is for that particular deterioration. But from a terrace above, that's an easy repair. From a slab of the deck, then you got to be much more careful on what you're using.
All right, thank you. Someone wants to know, when will the New York City garage regulations for the upcoming inspection be available? The building needs to perform considerable work on the garage and would like to know that we're covering all the items that will be included in the New York City garage inspections.
Okay, so if you have a project that's planned now, your engineering consultant, if they're one of the major firms, they will know ahead of time what is included. And the building department is pretty good with this. If you can certify at the time that within say in the last year, you've done a major inspection survey, and then you did a restoration over a few years, and he has documentation, they normally will allow the usage of that documentation to assist in that reporting process, and no additional work would be required. I can't promise you that, but I can tell you that's how the FISP inspection has worked as far as brick ties and other inspections that were required. Second thing is, I wouldn't hold off. If you have an active construction, have a need to do a garage restoration. I think that that's what the city's goal was. The goal of the city is to make sure that you're looking at these areas, you're restoring them as they are required, you file the proper permits, and you sign off the projects. And if you're doing that, I think you're within the spirit of the law that's proposed. I can't guarantee it, but I would not halt the job. I would, though, make sure that I keep records of all the testing that was done and all the restoration that was done.
All right. Thanks. Does infrared or similar non-destructive testing help with scanning concrete slabs in garages?
Infrared is really a temperature sense, right? So it can only really give you heat signatures. It may tell you where there's water, it may tell you where, moisture. It could tell you a couple of other things. But my experience with infrared, it works more in roofing as a supplement to help you in things, but probing is probably the best way to go about it. Now, there are some engineering firms that believe in X-ray, inspection of garages. But again, the question would become, if the garage has no significant deterioration and you've sounded it, why are you doing an X-ray inspection at that point? I don't think it's necessary. That's us.
Mm-hmm.
But other firms may believe that that's a different situation. If part of your restoration is to restore all the deterioration, do a chloride test, and see if the garage has significant cathode issues or electrolysis issues or deterioration within the concrete, and you determine that that's not the case, and you're putting a good coating system on top, that's really all you need to do. Okay, at this point. Now, remember, if you have commercial garages, you're talking about large things like by Madison Square Garden, those bigger garages, then more inspection, I think, is required in those buildings because the usage of that garage is tremendous. And you think about, how many cars are coming in and out on a daily basis, what the construction is, and a lot of those operators do spend a lot of money in more inspection and repair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. And it seems like also maybe it does affect commercial buildings or commercial garages even more because of the capacity that they have and the regular use. All right, so do you have any idea of how long they'll have to make repairs after the inspection?
I think it'll work a lot like the FISP rules. So basically there will be a time period in where the engineer says you need to do X, Y, and Z. So let me give you a scenario that I may do in a building. We go in, we see some spalling on the floor. We remove the loose material and we put a quick patch in place. We know it's going to fail. We know it's not going to work, but there's not time to do everything. And then on the ceiling, we may see some areas and where there may be a piece that may fall. We knock it off, and then we put some plywood or some cement board in place until an actual repair can be made. And then maybe you give them a time frame of a year or two to do the actual repairs, and that's the same way that you're dealing with FISP. Now, I'm only guessing, but that's what we've all been told, that that's probably how this is going to work. So it depends on the nature of the defect, and then it depends on how long your inspection consultant will provide you so that you can do those repairs.
Yeah, but the formal rules haven't been released yet, Gene. So.
No, not at all. Not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
I can't imagine that they're going to do that any differently, though, because just think about it. It's really the only natural way to do that, because otherwise everybody's going to have to run and do everything immediately. But if you find a significant structural defect in that garage, you've got to do something. You're going to have to notify the building department. You're going to have to put shoring in place. You're going to have to do something immediately, which you should. Okay.
Right. All right. Is car washing only a concrete deterioration risk if there's snow salt melt?
Okay. So I have some garages that tell me that I have to do car washing. I just have to do it. I go, I got no problem with that. So when we restore the garage, let's put in an area where it's curbed off. Okay, so you have a ramp that goes into the curb, and all the water that comes off the cars goes into this area, and it has a protective coating. You do it all the time. But then where does the water go? It goes into the drains. We see a lot of garages where it's not only the concrete that's deteriorated, but all the drain lines are totally rotted out. The drain bodies are rotted out. So if you're going to do that, my suggestion is replace the drains, reroute them so they're not within the slabs, so they can be maintained. And you may want to think about using a different drain pipe material to exit that material out of your building. Okay.
And that also assumes, Gene, that everything is pitched properly and the like. I mean, I think the idea is you just don't want standing water sitting anywhere on your garage. And so, salts or not, I mean, it's not ideal, and it assumes it's a perfect pitch throughout every level or through the totality to get to the drains, which is not always
we
likely.
repitch with the coating systems or overlays, and that normally a quarter, when you put a quarter in a puddle, that quarter, that water would evaporate within 24 hours, and that anything more than that, we really don't like to see.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, and I think we're wrapping it up. And then, of course, everyone, please feel free to email us after this. We have always encouraged audience participation and obviously our client questions. So the last question we'll finalize with is, do you think we'll be able to do FISP and garage inspections at the same time?
I do them already. It's a good question. I have a number of buildings that have garages, and I have a contractor on site doing a facade restoration, and I go inside and I say, listen, I got about $20,000 worth of work inside your garage. I think if we do that, you're gonna pass your inspection when the time comes. And plus, some of this is a safety factor. 99.9% of the time, the owner says, Gene, thanks a lot. Let's take care of it. Mm-hmm. But then there's the ones that say the leasee is responsible for the repair, and then they tell the leasee to take care of it, and he says, well, I'll take care of it when I have to. And he says, there's nothing mandating him to do that. Then you get into that big pissing contest. And I say, for $20,000, I think you should rewrite your lease next time, which is, if you don't take care of it the way that it's expected, we will do it and you will be responsible for it. Or increase the cost of the garage and take care of the things yourself, because then you have more control. It's a sticky little wick. There's a lot of good lawyers out there I deal with all the time. And it's funny, these garage leases are normally started back in the day when the sponsor had the building, and he makes the leasee responsible for the garage repairs because it takes it off of his plate. And then the boards get it, but they don't really understand that they're really not getting something that they think they're getting. They're getting cursory repairs, surface repairs, things that are not going to last a long time. And that's the problem, in my opinion.
Just because the lease says repairs doesn't mean it relates to per se structure. And so there might be another reference to that somewhere else in the lease that is a specific carve out. So we should read the leases very well, because it doesn't always take into account structure.
And for $20,000, we probably went through legal fees and consulting fees instead of repairing what needed to be done. If it's $20,000, sometimes it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. Okay. Mm-hmm. And here's the biggest one. They'll restore the garage. They'll bring the concrete back to where it was supposed to be, and there'll be no unsafe and hazardous conditions. That's probably what the lease intent was. But what's going to stop this from happening again? A coating system on top of where you're driving and so forth. Mm-hmm. Doesn't say anywhere, maybe in I've ever seen in a lease, where you have to restore or install a coating system on top of the concrete. That is something that where the owners really should take a look at and maybe want to pony up some money to do that, to protect their overall investment.
Mm-hmm. That's great advice. So I always like to end these with maybe one last tidbit for everyone, because we're so lucky to have you, and you obviously have a lot of expertise in this area. So is there anything that you can impart us with as we finish tonight off?
Well, I would say being proactive and being aware of your potential expenditures is a great spot to be, for the most part. Sometimes too much knowledge may cause you too much, anxiety. But, most of the times when you find out you have to spend money on something, you have that little shock. But then your energy is spent on what? To solve the problem. Mm-hmm. I'd rather know what the problem is and then start solving the problem than putting off this until everybody else is trying to do it. I will tell you, if you call my office tomorrow and you reach out to me and you want a proposal for this, we don't have capacity to take on hundreds and hundreds of bills. We don't. We have capacity to take care of our clients, and maybe we grow 10% a year. That's really what we look to do. But there are a lot of engineering firms, a lot of people are retiring. A lot of guys are getting out of the co-op and condominium market. Then you see other guys that are moving in different areas and specializing in different areas. Just don't think you pick up a phone anytime you want and you're going to get somebody to run out and go take care of your problem. It doesn't happen anymore. And Andy will tell you, sometimes they call us up an emergency. Most of the times we're a 365 firm, and we take over projects for other engineering companies that can't cover in those periods. But it's getting harder and harder to do it. So give yourself as much time as you can to take care of this problem.
Come on, Gene. You've never said no to me. Admit it.
I know, but I'm really getting to that point where I may have to, because I just can't. The capacity. You know what it's like. Every day is an emergency now.
Absolutely.
Turn him down in front of everyone, Gene. That's not nice. You already de-aged him. I mean, you already aged him. Now you really are aging him.
Yeah. Well, let's hope we keep getting older, as they say. The alternative is much worse.
Something to be said.
Well, I really appreciate your great words of wisdom. Thank you so much, Gene and Nick and Andy. We really appreciate your time tonight, and thank you everyone else for watching. Please let us know if you have any other questions, and of course we will get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you everyone, and be safe. Have a great night.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Yeah.